Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Eat Meat and Question Everything. Today we are joined with Kevin from Perennial Pastures. Thank you so much for being here today, Kevin.
Thank you, ladies, for having me.
Well, I think we should just get into it. So, can you just tell us a little bit about your personal story and then how you got to becoming a full-fledged rancher?
Sure. Yeah. For me, it's all started in college when I was an athlete. I played collegiate baseball at University of San Diego for 4 years for a pretty competitive team, and during that time, I was really obviously into working out and peak performance, and I discovered the paleo diet. And I read Dr. Lauren Cordain's book, and I was really sort of the teacher and coach for our team to go down a path of grass-fed and ancestral eating. So for me, it began in college. I didn't get into agriculture until a little bit later, but my questioning of everything started then, coming back to the theme of your podcast, right? I was questioning how we produce food, how, you know, we've become so addicted to grains and sugar and all these other things. So for me, really started there, and my performance did thrive. I started on the paleo diet, and we were doing a lot of Olympic lifting and CrossFit workouts, and folks were seeing my results in the weight room. My teammates were seeing my results in the weight room, and really everybody just got on board because my recovery was solid. I felt good. My mental health was good. So it's really been a journey ever since then. In college, I've always been a person who loved being outside. I grew up going to the Eastern Sierras as a kid raised in Southern California, going to Mammoth Mountain, playing in the snow, but also going there in the summertime and learning about the grasses and the wildflowers. And I always felt at home in nature. So when professional baseball and my aspirations there sort of came to an end after college, I really started asking myself, hey, how could I live a career that's somehow involved with food, is going to lend itself for me to be outside. And so agriculture just became that option for me. And an agriculture that is aligned with nature, that actually builds soil. It's all about nutrient density. I came across regenerative agriculture, and I've been really on this regenerative agriculture path ever since for about 10 years now. I graduated college in 2011. I'm 35 years old, and now, running a direct-to-consumer grass-fed protein business called Perennial Pastures that is headquartered here in San Diego, California. I live in San Marcos, and we're in 7 farmers markets. We have a whole online presence. We do ranch tours every month, and we ranch 16,000 acres here in Southern California. So we can kind of get into that too, but I think that's just a general background on myself and kind of where we're at today.
Awesome. Yeah. What a big change. So you just like jumped into farming, like, hey, I need to raise some cattle. Like it's not like you were born into this, right?
Right. Yeah. So I'm a first generation rancher. I didn't grow up in ranching. I was born in Torrance, California in LA County. And yeah, I was wanted to be a baseball player my whole life. But when I chose this path, I chose to work with people that had a lot more knowledge than me. And again, that was around 2011, 2012. I took this big leap, and I learned from a lot of the pioneers in the movement. This movement of regenerative agriculture has been going on for about 40, 50 years. And so there's been folks that have been doing it for a long time. And I was lucky enough to work with a lot of those folks that had a lot more experience than myself. So I was able to internalize their experience, build upon it, take what I learned in business school at University of San Diego, because I did get a degree there as well, and apply those principles to this movement that is really ready to grow. It's been going for about 40 years, but it's just starting to have its time in the sun. So I'm lucky to sort of be standing on the shoulders of a lot of the folks that have gone before me that have really built the movement. And I see it now, upon myself, the millennial generation, to grow that, make it more of the standard as opposed to, the food system we have now.
Yeah. Now, sorry, Devin, were you gonna?
I was just gonna ask, like, I grew up in the middle of nowhere. I have experience. I worked on a horse farm for a long time. My grandpa was a farmer. My mom grew up in that. So I like know I know what regenerative farming is. I never realized that that's like what, my friends who had farms did, because that was just the way of life. So I was just gonna ask, like, for people who did not grow up around that or have like no notion of what regenerative farming is, like, is that what you were going to ask, Courtney? Like, what is regenerative farming 101?
Yeah, like what is it exactly? And then what is it? How is it different than, I guess, just another farm that's not calling themselves that? Like, what's the different? Like, yeah, just dumb it down for us, please.
Yeah, sure. So it's really an agriculture that mimics nature. Nature has been farming for, millennia, and really it comes down to a focus on the soil. And so for us in regenerative ranching, that means moving the animals on the landscape in a way that mimics the bison and buffalo herds that used to be here in North America, right? So that means keeping them together, bunched and moving around with the right behavior and the right recovery periods on grasses to build soil. So grasses have evolved with herbivores and things, animals like cattle or bison or buffalo, and they've evolved to be grazed down very severely, trampled, and then peed and pooped on, and then rested for a long time, right? The reason the herbivores, the bison, would bunch together on the grassland is because they would protect themselves from predators that way. So when we used to have predators, wolves and mountain lions and these apex predators that would hunt those animals, they would need to be in a herd for protection. So now that we no longer have really those apex predators in our landscape, we have to do this via fencing, portable fencing, high tensile fencing. So we use that, or herding in some aspects as well on really large landscapes, to just mimic that behavior of the animal. So it's really comes down to the management of the animal in a ranching scenario, and then in an agricultural scenario, it comes down to mimicking those same principles that nature used to build soil. Like in nature, you never see bare ground, right? So you always want to keep your soil covered. So how do we do that in a farming sense? Well, cover crops, right? And then using the animals to come in and graze those cover crops and keep mulch on the ground. So it's a stark difference. It's not by any means whatsoever just a marketing shtick. It is a complete paradigm change in the way that you think about how we do agriculture. Ours is that regenerative agriculture is about restoring the ecosystem, the biodiversity of the landscape, the biodiversity of the soil, restoring the cycles of nature, the carbon cycle, the mineral cycle, the water cycle. It's in stark contrast to what we would call the industrial agriculture, which has really only been around for 100 years. This emphasis on nitrogen fertilizers, tilling the ground, trying to get as much production as possible out of the ground through a high input system. Regenerative agriculture is low input, high input. Might not be high output, excuse me. It might not be the highest output, but you have the lowest inputs, and it's the agricultural system that's most in line with nature. So at its core, that's its base and the most basic definition I could probably give you.
Okay, that's interesting. So okay, I guess a lot of comments I get are, eating this way, because we're both carnivore, eating this way, like it's not good for the environment. The cow emissions, or even it's not even just the cow farts they're talking about. They're talking about like the whole process of everything. Can you touch on any of that? Like it seems like, because regenerative farming, it's such like a hot topic right now. Is that the way to go then, to make this more like sustainable for our planet? What are your thoughts on that?
For sure. first of all, I love that you're carnivore and love your whole journey, and have been following, your work here now for a few months, and it's been great to just get familiar with your content and how you're bringing healthy, nutrient dense eating to the people. So, first of all, like, I think beef is one of the best, if not the best protein that's out there right now, because all beef, I don't care whether it's conventional beef that's finished in a feedlot or beef that is finished on grass, it's very nutrient dense because it gets the majority of its life on grass. Okay. Which is in stark contrast to chickens and pork, which conventional commodity chicken and pork can live its whole life in a barn, be born in a barn, fed in a barn, never see a blade of grass, right? And grass is really where nutrients come from, the soil, the grass, right? So kudos to you for, going down this path, eating nutrient dense and recommending that to your customers. What we're starting to find out is that grass finished beef in a regenerative model can be more nutrient dense than conventional beef. And that's because cows, bovines were evolved to eat grass and not grain. In a grain scenario, finished on grain, and you finish them too long on grain without the right mixture of roughage, you need to have antibiotics into the system because the animal gets sick. The way that they digest that roughage and forage, the high grain diets, creates an imbalance in the rumen and creates, disease, right? So grass finished beef, especially on a regenerative ranch where you're trying to increase biodiversity, what we're starting to learn from organizations like the Bionutrient Food Association, which is run by a guy named Dan Kittredge. He's done this research already with produce, where he's been able to prove that conventionally grown produce is less nutrient dense than regenerative produce. We're starting to find out with beef grown in a regenerative model that eats a diverse forage is more nutrient dense. And it's all the way down to the flavonoids, the secondary compounds. The beauty of a cow is that they can take stuff that we can't eat and convert it into meat or milk that we can eat, right? So they can eat a shrub. I did a video on this the other day on the ranch, like the bulls were eating buckwheat and there was a bite mark off the buckwheat. Well, we can't go and eat that shrub or buckwheat, but there's antifungal, antiviral, anti-inflammatory compounds in that shrub that then become part of the meat that then become part of our bodies, right? So it's a whole circle. It starts with the soil again. A nutrient-dense soil creates a nutrient-dense plant that creates more biodiversity in the landscape, which the more biodiversity and nutrients you get into the cow, and the meat and the milk becomes part of us, and it's a whole circle, right? So that's what I like to highlight in terms of the nutrient density conversation. And then, yeah, there is an environmental benefit too, because the more life that you have in your soil, the more water you can store in the soil, the more carbon you can store in the soil, and you just restore the cycles of nature and life. So it is more ecologically beneficial as well, as opposed to the CAFO model, confined animal feeding operation model, which concentrates cows in one area, all of their excrement and dung and urine go into a centralized location, which gives off a decent amount of methane. What we're realizing with cows on pasture is, yeah, they still do burp and fart, but in a pasture scenario, even in a non-regenerative grazing scenario where they're just let to roam free, those gases are actually contained in the lower atmosphere. I can get all into it, like all the details. I don't think we need to, but essentially it's a non-issue in a pasture-based situation. You do have some methane emissions, although feedlots have gotten much more efficient at that and being able to manage that in a conventional scenario. But still, the creme de la creme of the whole deal is if you can have an animal that finishes well on grass, is nutrient dense and beneficial for the environment, why not eat that way anyways? Like, everybody should be eating that way. The only reason that the confined animal feeding operations work is because we have subsidized grain in this country, and it makes it much more cheaper to eat, and you can produce more easily a consistent product that finishes well and tastes well. So people like tender beef that is finished well. And we just haven't gotten to the point in this country to finish grass finished animals well that has a 95% success rate in terms of like a quality eating experience, right? So those are some factors of like why there's a difference between grass fed and grain finished in the whole CAFO model. So
Yeah, there definitely is a difference in the flavor. And I can't quite put my finger on it. I sent you a message the other day. It's like, because I just tried your meat for the first time and it was very good. I couldn't figure out like, oh, it kind of almost tasted a little sweet, but not, I couldn't figure it out. But I've had other grass finished stuff before. I've had some that tasted good and some that had like a fishy taste. Now, I've said that on my like stories before, and people said like it had to do like with the omegas, like something they're eating in the grass. So it's interesting, I guess. Also, someone said like the weather, it can all affect it. So like so many things can affect what the actual like meat tastes like in the end when it's
Well,
not being grain finished.
and isn't like stress levels can affect the taste and quality of the meat too? Yes or no?
yeah, for sure. Yeah. And Courtney, you're right. There's so many different factors that influence the eating experience, right? And grass finished beef that's finished here in San Diego is going to taste different than grass fed beef that's finished in the Midwest versus grass fed beef that's finished in Australia, right? There's different grasses, cool season, warm season grasses, different shrubs, different legumes, all sorts of different finishing methods. So I think that's the beauty of grass fed and grass finished beef, though, is you get this element of terroir, right? We know terroir with wine, like this region of wine tastes like the territory. Well, I think what we have to get into is the terroir of beef. Like right now we have acorns falling on the ranch, and animals that we harvest during this time eat the acorns off the oak trees on the ground, and they're going to have a different, like, nuttier, oilier, flavor to them, as opposed to animals that we harvest in the spring that are finished on wildflowers and different things, right? So yeah, again, it's just the industry has to mature. Over the last 60, 80 years, genetics and everything have gone towards this feedlot model, which hasn't been good for the producers, because the feedlots and the finishers have made most of the money over the last 60 to 80 years. And there's a ton of consolidation in the industry, with like 4 packers controlling 80% of the beef packing in the country. So we have to get back to controlling our own genetics, getting animals that finish better off of grass, and just getting better at doing it, right? So that fishy taste could have also been from having the animals eat grass that hasn't been fully and properly rested, right? So if you eat grass that's too young, where it's like fresh grass off of a rain, there's a ton of protein in it, and you can have too much nitrates in the meat, and you can kind of get these off flavors in the meat. Whereas if you were to allow, in our grazing system, the grasses to fully recover before we graze them, they have a balance of fiber and protein in the grass, which gives it that nuttier flavor, right? Because it's a more balanced palate. It would be like us going out and eating an all sugar diet, and like we feel different, as opposed to eating, proteins and fats. It's a more balanced diet. So those are some more kind of tidbits and talking points to the whole finishing conversation.
Yeah, that's so interesting that all that comes into play with what the cow actually tastes like. And I guess what you were saying earlier is when they are finished on grain, it's easier, I guess, to have that consistent flavor because you're more in control of what they're being fed. I don't know. This is just fascinating to me.
I know you're like just starting down this path. I'm like throwing a lot at you, and you're newly carnivore, or what is it, 6 months or
6 months. Yeah,
a
but like
year?
new into the
Yeah.
whole, even like regenerative farming and the grass finish, because this whole time you hear grass fed, but now we know that they can say that and still be grain finished, right? Like you can say grass fed, but
Yeah.
they're, oh yeah, all
Right.
this is like new to me. I'm just, yeah, hit me with it. I'm absorbing it. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be great to have you out to the ranch. Hopefully in January we can bring you out. But yeah, I mean, again, that's the beauty of cattle, though, is they do live, 10, even the grain finished ones, 10 to 12 months on grass, and then they're finished for 2 to 4 months, sometimes a little bit longer on, in a feedlot. So at least they get a good majority of their life on pasture, which is really where a lot of the nutrient density and minerals come from. But the fat and the flavor, like people love fat, right? We all love fat. We love the way that it tastes. When your system starts running on fat, you feel better, right? It's a more consistent energy source. But there's different kinds of fat and there's different breakdowns. And I do really firmly believe that grass finished fat is better than grain finished fat. And I mean, there's so many directions we could go, like the economics of it. Like it is more expensive just because, again, grain is subsidized in this country. So it's easy to pump a ton of grain into a grain finished animal at the end of its life and get it to maturity much quicker. Whereas like we have to go 24 to 36 months sometimes to finish an animal, where a conventional animal can be finished in 12 to 14 months, right? So that makes it cheaper because it's less feed. But I'm of the opinion when we do regenerative ranching, which is a low input model, and we have ranches that are big in scale, like we ranch 16,000 acres, so we can ranch a lot of animals with a few amount of people. And when you're not feeding the animal, that's less input. So I do believe there's a future, especially if we have an even playing field of getting the subsidies out of the game, where grass finished becomes cheaper than grain finished. So that's a whole nother discussion to make a nutrient dense way of eating available to more people. Cause I know that's really what it comes down to too. I see in your videos, you go to Costco and get some of your product there. Like my wife and I just signed up for Costco and, there's some stuff there, but it's like, like we have to like make it accessible to customers like that. There's no reason why we can't have this same great tasting beef that's grass finished available in Costco and people don't even know the difference that they're eating regenerative meat versus non-regenerative meat. I think there's a future, in that. So yeah, anyways, there's a lot of different directions we could go.
Yeah. What do you think, Devin?
So like I had mentioned, I am like a beef snob. I am one of those people that's like, oh, it's not grass fed, grass finished. It's just not acceptable. So I know that Courtney said like she's just getting into this. I have been a snob my entire life with this stuff because like I was just very aware of it growing up. But one thing I had read on your website that I think a lot of people don't think about is the stress factor of the animals. And there was a specific section about talking about how you guys do everything you can. There's a method that it's called. It's someone's name. It escapes me. But there's like a method approach to make sure that these animals are living in the least stress, just the most natural environment as far as stress too. Can you just like talk about that? Because I feel like a lot of, especially with social media, you see these cows and these lots and there's high, I mean, this could also be argued, but they look like they're a lot, under a lot of stress. So in your approach, what are the things compared to a very traditional, what we would think as traditional, the feedlot farming? What do you do differently basically to minimize that stress?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, we practice low stress livestock handling techniques. The name you're probably searching for was Bud Williams. He's kind
Yeah.
of the guru father behind low stress livestock handling techniques. What he discovered is there's different angles and pressure release techniques, either on horseback or on foot or whatever you're using to move a cow, to get the desired action that you want. So either when you're gathering them or when you're moving them from pasture to pasture in this high density grazing system, there's a way to move your body and to put pressure on an animal and then release it where it becomes almost their decision, right? So it becomes just this like symphony, I like to say, on the grassland where you're using yourself and a horse to put pressure in the right angles and the right amount to get the whole herd to move where you want it to go, right? So that's the logistics of moving animals on the ranch. Now, there's other things too, such as your corral design and your chute design. Anytime you're doing work on the animal there, that can minimize stress. The beef industry has come a long way as far as that, in terms of rubber flooring in the chute to minimize noise, electric generators to run these hydraulic chutes to minimize noise. So there's a lot of things on the ranch that we can do. And then on their final day, we work with a company called One World Beef in Brawley, and their facility for that we process at was designed by Temple Grandin. She's the other guru who has designed chutes and curves when the animal gets offloaded at the facility, rubber flooring mats, misters, shade for the cows that, like, before they go in for their final moment, it's a very low stress scenario too. So yes, it really matters, because cortisol levels can go up and then the glycogen levels come down, where you can literally run the fat off an animal or stress the fat off an animal, right? If they go on a truck for too long, our animals are on a truck for 2 hours, and we're moving actually in a direction of developing our own slaughter facility on the ranch, so that the slaughter facility is here where the animals never have to get on a truck to do that, right? So yeah, tons of inroads to be made there in terms of constantly reducing stress on an animal. In a conventional scenario, they use, oftentimes what's the standard is livestock cattle prods is what they're called. So, they give them a little shock to move in different. We don't use those. We try not to yell. We do rope and brand our calves. Like we're believers in the Western way of doing things, and we're a bit old school that way in terms of, still fostering those skills of horsemanship. And there's a whole lineage of the California cowboy, and we're big on maintaining those hard skills because I think that keeps us a resilient operation. But it's, yeah, all these things are much, I mean, your point of the animals having a lot of stress in the feedlot, I think the stress comes from just lying in their own, excrement and, dung and urine, the last 2 months of their life and not getting to roam free. I think that does cause stress, and that's indicated through some of the illnesses that they develop in the feedlot. So yeah, I do think that our model really is the best in terms of, like, just giving the animal the best life it can, right? From grazing every day to fresh grass to stretching its legs to giving it a diversity of forage to having the relationship that you want with the animal, where it's almost like, it's really cool when you're doing this grazing system and you're moving the animals every day. When you first start out doing this, they are a little scared of you. They're scared to, like, kind of go by you because you, like, open these fences and then they go by you, and they're some of them run real quick and then some of them walk. But, like, at the end of it, like 2 or 3 weeks in, they're like, hey, this guy's just letting me to a new pasture every day, and, like, it's a good thing every time he comes out here. And they kind of get trained really quickly, and they're like, and then they're just like, it's like no big deal to move by you. They're not afraid to, like, come close to you. And that's the kind of behavior you want. Like, that's the behavior, like, in Africa that they have with their herd, like the African genetics that we're actually mixing into our herd. Those like all developed, like, in close proximity to herds, people, right, that were, like, with them every day. And then at night, actually, they lock them up in these night corrals to protect them from lions and hyenas. So they know that the humans are there to protect them and to steward them, right? So that's kind of the same effect that we have with, like, moving the animals every day. So yeah, there's a whole thread there that's really cool to talk about that most people don't know about in the beef industry. Is it's really centered around low stress livestock handling.
Okay. Yeah, because I see that a lot. Like, I can't believe you can eat meat. Like, these poor animals, they just live a horrible life and they're tortured all day and they're raped and taken from their mother. Like, the list goes on the things people say, but it sounds like they're enjoying a nice day at the spa, at least on your ranch. Like, it doesn't sound horrific at all.
I think you have quite a few vegan followers on your TikTok channel or something like that, and sometimes you have some battles with them on there.
Yeah, I think the algorithm is not hitting the target audience over there, especially because they keep commenting. So it tells the algorithm like vegan people are my people. So yeah, and it's just I
Well,
feel
it's
like
good. I mean, because we have to like spread the information. There's a lot of disinformation out there, and the whole plant-based movement have poured billions of dollars literally into marketing that this technology of lab meat is going to save us, and it couldn't be farther from the truth. So books like Sacred Cow and movies like Sacred Cow are great. Rob Wolf and Diana Rogers really did a good one there in terms of like just breaking down the whole environmental, social and ecological arguments between plant-based and animal-based. And yeah, like it's folks like yourself that are just learning more, and like obviously you feel a lot better eating a nutrient dense animal based diet. So like, to be honest with you, a lot of our farmers market ambassadors were former vegans and vegetarians, and they just ended up getting sick, and now they're just full regen animal based converts. They're drinking the Kool-Aid because they feel great. They never want to go back. They felt crappy on this. They were fed a bunch of lies, and now they've seen the light, and there's no turning back for them. And when you start to make more connections, I mean, again, you've made the great connection of health, but like when you start to find out more of like the environment and how it connects with the larger whole, you're just like, duh, like this is just how humans are supposed to live on this planet. So
yeah, okay. Well, speaking of that, so what are your thoughts then? Because I get this a lot too. Like, we couldn't, if everyone wanted to eat meat or even be carnivore, that it wouldn't be possible. Like, there wouldn't be enough space to do all this beef or whatever their argument
yeah.
is. Like, is that like a good point they're making, or you think that's wrong?
No, it's definitely wrong. They break that argument down in the Sacred Cow book, and I wish I had it with me here because there's a bunch of good stats, and I don't have all the stats fresh on top of my mind as far as the land use dialogue. However, there is so much unusable land for the things that vegetarians and vegans eat, which are, you know, grain crops or annual crops, right? There's very little usable farmland on this planet. So if everybody, you can make the argument that if everybody was to eat vegan, that's not realistic at all, because there's very little flat land that's irrigated that you can grow crops on, right? Whereas the majority of our land and land types are unsuitable for crops, but great for livestock, whether it's sheep, goats, or cattle, right? So there's much more land. If you just look at San Diego County alone, all of these interior, and I know you live in Orange County, like Southern California, there's so many of these interior unused lands right now that are like conserved, but probably at one point had livestock on them when they were Spanish land grant lands, right? So we could live off that land, like a sheep or a goat or a cow could harvest nutrients off of that land and we could eat it. So we're not using even all the usable land that we have right now to produce cattle, yet we have the potential to feed this country. So it's just a much more regenerative and resilient source of food, right? It's easier to do too, right? Like if you have a bad hailstorm or a terrible drought, your crop is going to fail, and then what are you going to eat? Whereas if it doesn't, so regenerative grazing helps a lot too, because you're planning your grazing out and you're planning drought reserves. So if you have a drought, you can get through your droughts easier. But there's a good example, like in Vermont, like one time it wasn't sunny the whole summer and all the crops failed, whereas like sheep did great because they like being in clouds, and the grasses did great that year. So the people that have livestock survive, but the people that didn't, that were just based off crops or that was their sole source of income, they had a tough time. So animals, especially milk, when you're having that daily, yield from the milk, like milk, small scale dairy probably the most resilient, and then proteins after that, especially proteins that we can salt and preserve, right? So there's a lot there too, but yeah, those are some key highlights.
Yeah, that's a good point on the land. And we've kind of, Devin, talked about this before. I think even talking with Cassidy about how, like, yeah, some land isn't usable. Um, and good point with Diana Rogers. You know, I actually haven't seen her movie or read the book, but I do follow her and she has a ton of great information that I'm always sharing. And I've shared it on TikTok and they did not appreciate that. They're like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's a quack. Like they're never gonna be happy, but I do need to watch or read that because she is like she's wonderful and she's not even it's not even like a carnivore agenda. She's just sharing because she's not carnivore, but she's just pro meat because she understands and she gets it. So yeah, definitely recommend her and that for anyone that's listening. So
What's the
Devin,
stat of like folks that actually stay vegan and vegetarian? Like
it's
the
so low. I forget what number.
But isn't it like 90% of vegans within like 5 years go back to eating meat or something? It's like a
Yeah,
crazy, like
because I think
85 to 90% or something like that.
it's very high and it is, yeah, they say like between that 5 and 7 year range is when like the health decline starts to kick in. Like of course you're going to feel good at first because you're probably getting rid of like the sugars and stuff, but then you're just being malnourished essentially. And yeah, I see it every day in the comments, like how it's literally affecting their brains, like not having this animal protein, like it's making them, they're crazy.
Mean. And they're mean.
Yeah, they're very aggressive because their mental health isn't good at
Oh
all
yeah.
depleted.
You should interview my wife. She's a clinical psychologist and has got her PhD, and she just started a site you can follow on Instagram called Ancestral Psyche. She's starting to put content out there about literally like the biological effects of having, a low nutrient diet, so super
Yeah,
interesting
We are
stuff.
going to need that
And
like immediately because we always talk about um getting someone who has like a psychological background to discuss because mental illness is so talked about and it's become accepted like, oh, we all have mental illness, we all have anxiety, depression, all the things, but no one is talking about how important nutrient dense food can be to combat against mental illness and how much nutrient deficiency really can play a part in the human brain and how we regulate our emotions. Like I don't ever hear that, to be honest, minus just like the carnivore space that we're in. But outside of that nutrient, like the carnivore space, I don't hear, nutritionists who are conventionally trained discussing that at all.
yeah. It's been really great. Our fields are starting to like meld closer and closer, and we want to start doing like retreats where she teaches a little bit about it. And we work with a lot of healers and nutritionists in our company, that work farmers markets for us and have their own side businesses. And we're kind of like developing sort of this consortium, and we'd love to talk to you guys about being involved in it where, like we're sharing knowledge across disciplines, and whether you're a practitioner or a coach or a PhD in the case of my wife, or just a rancher, like there's so many connections to be made. And the spark for my wife really too recently to start this ancestral psyche was she's a new mom, and we have a 11th month old, and just going through the whole process of nursing, and building a new human life, physically in the womb and then through the breastfeeding process. It's amazing some of the, stuff like, that is out there in terms of what's healthy and what's not. And you see like vegan moms, and the like the brain scans of their kids versus, carnivore or, paleo or keto or, animal based, moms. And my wife ate a whole ton of our ancestral blend during her pregnancy, which has the liver and heart in it, which has like the key ingredients and nutrients like folate and choline that are important for neural tube development and all these things. And then after, like, she started drinking a lot of raw milk to really boost her milk supply, and she did great. She crushed it, breastfed for 10 months, and now he's on like a raw milk, kind of like we do his Bobby formula, but he's like on a combo between raw milk and that, and soon he'll just be on raw milk, like after a year or whatever. So like, it's so important in terms of like the first few years of a human life too. And like, I mean, I grew up on Cinnamon Toast Crunch and like Captain Kids or like Captain Crunch, and like I turned out to be a D1 athlete and everything. But like, could you imagine like, having like this knowledge from like literally like conception in the womb all the way through, and like other stuff that, I don't know. So like, it's just really exciting to think about. I did a podcast with Dr. Stan Hom, who's a holistic chiropractor down here in San Diego and is really leading a lot of the freedom movement and stuff. Super interesting guy. You should definitely have him on the show. But like we went into all of that, like the whole kid thing. And that's what really gets me excited too, is like the next generation and building a life for them and just having them be as healthy as possible too.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, like I said, like when we were evolving and eating like these meat-based diets, like, millions of years ago, like we were giants, like huge giants. And it's like, you think like, what can we do to change our evolution if we start getting this information out, and these awesome little children are, drinking raw milk and breast milk and, from the very get-go, instead of these horrible, horrible things that we grew up on. So you're raising the next superhuman.
Yeah, no more soy boys. But I would love to talk to your wife because I just recently went off of Zoloft. And because I could tell while I was still on it, because I had such a low dose because I was so high before and it just numbed me out. So I lowered the dose. So I still wasn't like amazing. And I could see a shift after eating this way. And, share that on TikTok, and inappropriate. It was inappropriate for me to even suggest that my diet has anything to do with mental health. Like, what the hell? Like, this is what everyone is being told to believe. Like, keep up eating your junk food because it has nothing to do with mental health. Like, that is just asinine to me.
Yeah.
So I would love to speak with her about that, even though of course it's not going to be good enough for the haters, but the people that want to,
No.
would receive it for sure.
Well, the cream rises to the top. We know that being raw milk drinkers. So, like the truth will prevail. And yeah, she could go into that, her whole journey with that too, because she's had her own, whole thing with, like as an early young, adult too, just like being like, oh, here you have some acne, here's some birth control. No minding of like what that's going to do to her hormones long term and all that. So like, yeah, and then obviously she's schooled in the whole antidepressants and all that, as well as tools and this and that. But you guys would have a super fruitful conversation about that, and I'm sure she would love to talk to you about that. So
yeah, that would be an amazing topic, and we've actually already talked about finding someone like that to talk about it with. So that's awesome.
Cool.
Sorry if you can hear my dog barking. So I'll mute myself, but I don't know if before we wrap things up, Devin, is there anything else you want to touch on?
Yeah, I'd like to I don't know how I want to phrase the question, but I'm going to ask one more serious question, and then we always ask 3 fun questions before we conclude. But since we kind of discussed the vegan and like vegans in general, I think that there is a lot of one thing in the Sacred Cow that I loved is there's this one particular farmer, and he's a regenerative farmer, and him and his spouse had said that the most important thing about them as farmers was that they raised these animals in a really respectful way, but that they honored their lives upon conclusion. And I just wondered if you could speak to like the importance of the regenerative. I don't know how I'm trying to phrase the question, but I don't think a lot of people, especially, we not just vegans, but a lot of people who are just like, well, I don't want to eat a lot of beef because it's unethical and these animals and all that kind of taboo, like dogmatic approach that we have to looking at animal abuse and farming. Like how important is it to just be super I guess, just honor and respect the life of the livestock that you guys are raising, because I don't think that this is talked about enough. I think we talk about the environment, but, just really honoring these animals that give us so much nourishment. I'm sorry, it's not a good phrasing. I don't know what I'm trying to phrase
Oh,
it, but I
yeah.
think you can see where I'm getting to.
Yeah. No, I definitely know where you're going with that. And for us, especially being a regenerative ranching operation, it's all about honoring the dignity and the way each form of life like expresses itself, right? So a cow wants to graze and be out in the open, like, you know, we ourselves, need sunlight, need to be out in nature, diversifying our microbiome and seeing these beautiful landscapes, right? A pig, a chicken, everything kind of has its own innate, best life, right? So we honor that. We honor the cycles of nature. We honor that we as humans are a part of nature and we have a role to steward nature and to make it better and not worse. And the whole argument of, oh, well, our to die less harm. Well, if you go out to a tilled field that's been chemically fallowed or sprayed with glyphosate or what have you, it's devoid of life. And you're erasing or eliminating an ecosystem that might, have harbored some life, if there's trees or grasses or shrubs on that landscape. That's a much more healthier landscape than a bare tilled field. And not to mention when you go out there and do that tilling or that chemical fallowing, you're killing life. You're killing rodents under the soil, mice, bird habitat, eggs from birds, not to mention all the insects, right? So the notion that this vegan or vegetarian lifestyle is less harm than an animal-based lifestyle is completely false. Now, I do not support confined animal feeding operations and putting an animal into a dedicated feedlot. There are better, sort of finishing operations that still give them access to pasture, and you can give them grains. That's fine if you want to do that, and you want to finish an animal a little bit more. Ideally, those grains were grown in a way though that's regenerative to the soil too, because you can do that as well. You can grow grains in a regenerative way with livestock integration. So just bringing everybody back to this notion that like we can make the world a better place, we can make our environment a better place. And yeah, I mean, honoring the life, like I make a personal endeavor of taking all of our animals to the facility and saying a prayer and thanking them for their life, and before we eat them, at the home, like just thanking them for the nutrient density, and the sustenance and abundance that they're giving us. It's just such a more wholesome, connected way to live, I think, and really feel. And I think if you're to ask my wife, who's a clinical psychologist, mentally healthy too, because you're connected to all these things and you're a part of a greater whole. Like she works with really sick eating disorder patients, and those eating disorders are diseases of isolation and loneliness. They're not connected to their community, their food, where their food comes from. They don't see the larger whole of how their food choices affect this. It's just like, how can I do this, and how can I live in this small little thing and calorie count? And it's just like it deduces food to this very small little lonely space where like food is like the most expansive uniting thing that we can do. So yeah, I mean, those are my thoughts on, I think, where you were going with that, of like the honor in the food system, the honoring the animal, the honoring the natural cycles of life.
That was brilliant. All I can think is, yeah, that's gonna make a really good clip to like put out, because that I think it's the, but no one talks about that. No one talks about how, eating disorders. I'm like even scared to talk about it, to be honest. But like if you look back hundreds of years ago, that didn't exist, because food was the center of life for the most part. I mean, it was just the center of everything. I mean, you didn't go to the grocery store and not know, where your avocado came from, or your chicken. It was just the center of life, and we don't ever talk about that anymore. I mean, I don't even know that anyone we've spoken to has really brought up how it is like a community, and it used to be that way every day for everyone. So
Yeah, I love that. And good point on like the mental illness and how it is being so like disconnected from the food and the community and all that. So that's another thing I want to dive into her with. That would, yeah, I just love all that. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's so nice. Like, you know, even just like I feel when I'm eating my steak, I'm like, gosh, I'm so grateful for, you know, the cow that gave its life to nourish me. Because I mean, we are human. Like it is still, at least to me, a little bit sad in a way that an animal had to die to nourish me. But I mean, if we didn't eat them, then it's like, okay, fuck our health at the expense of keeping a cow alive. Like I believe that they're here to nourish us. So yeah, I think just, you know, treating them with love and kindness and having that gratitude that they're nourishing us is awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's normal, to get a little sad. I mean, it is a life, that we're taking. But again, the cyclical approach is like, okay, well, we're gonna die someday, and I want to be planted under a tree or out in the field, and some grass is gonna grow for me or whatever, and like cow's gonna eat the grass. So it's a whole circle. And if we place ourselves in that, it's just you get into some of the spiritual realms. But yeah, I mean, it's everything's connected, and yeah, so yeah, I'm with you on that one, Courtney.
Yeah, the circle of life. I think
Amen.
that's a nice spot to end, Devin, unless your
do you
hands
want to ask
flapping.
her 3 fun questions real
Go
quick?
for it. Yep.
Okay, are you good for some
Sure.
fun ones?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, number 1, what is your favorite curse word?
Definitely fuck.
Every single person has said that word. They're like,
Yeah.
yep. Okay, I think I'm just gonna use that as like the baseline and expect everyone to say
Okay. Yeah.
the F word. Some people are too scared to say it, so I appreciate that. Number 2, what is your favorite junk food? Because like most of the people we talk to are carnivore. I don't know if you're exclusively carnivore, but you're a paleo person. So what was your favorite non-paleo thing to eat or is?
uh I'd say I kind of two come to mind. My wife's cookies. She makes some like really great cookies. Like that's like, all right, junk food. I mean, and I love a good In-N-Out burger every now and then, and like a shake, so it's like, all right,
I'm on
probably not the best bread or tomatoes or lettuce, but at least I'm having some beef in there, and so, yeah, if you call it a junk food, but In-N-Out
No,
burger.
I went there yesterday. I do not call it junk
Courtney.
food.
Yeah, Courtney is always is always taking videos of her In-N-Out stuff, and it kills me because we lived in Colorado for a really long time. And so there was like In-N-Outs in Colorado and Arizona, and now we live in Virginia and there is no In-N-Outs. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So when I get to Texas, if there's an In-N-Out, I will be
It's so
going.
delicious. I get
So
their Flying Dutchman, and it's just I don't know what it is. I cannot recreate it at home. And like I heard that they have the cheese like made for them specifically, some sort of like American cheese, but it's fabulous.
What is the Flying Dutchman?
It's a burger patty, a piece of cheese, a burger patty, and a piece of cheese. So it's essentially like a
Oh,
double
nice.
double without all the other
Yeah.
stuff, and it's like $3.30. And they don't use
Wow.
there's seed oils like when they do their fries, and I know there's soy in their bread, but when they're just doing the burgers, there's no oils on their grill. It's just
On
tallow.
their grill. Okay, that's cool. That's good to know. I'm gonna have to go for that next time then, if I just want something super clean.
Yeah, and if you
Like
do
that.
eat onions, like you can get a Flying Dutchman with like grilled onions. I'm not eating the plants right now, but once in a while a rogue onion gets in there and I'm like, whoo, like it's such a strong flavor because I'm not used to it.
Right,
But
nice.
yeah,
Okay.
very
Good to
delicious.
know.
Do the last one.
okay. Third question, what are you currently watching or reading?
Okay. My wife and I are watching, or I guess rewatching, The Crown. Just kind of, I don't know. We like history, and the whole like royal mentality is like super interesting because we don't have it here really in America. So we're watching that, and then also, yeah, Prince or Queen Elizabeth, passed this year. So we're like, we don't really know much about her. Like, let's learn a little bit. So we're starting from the beginning. My wife's more interested in like the whole Princess Diana, side of it. But like, if we went straight to that one, we wouldn't know the whole history. So it's good to know,
That's a
I
good
think.
rabbit
And
hole.
then I'm reading the Bitcoin. Yeah, right. Yeah, for
Like
sure.
if
A
you're
lot of stuff
if you're
there,
a
but
conspiracy theorist like me, that I just recently went down that whole rabbit hole of the royals, and it's pretty wild.
oh yeah, okay. I'm known to, throw a conspiracy theory out here and there. And, the funny thing is like when conspiracy theories, start becoming more and more true, maybe they become less and less conspiracy theories. But that's another podcast. And then I'm reading The Bitcoin Standard by Saif Dina Moose. And it's just kind of like probably the best general book on Bitcoin, which I think is a really interesting potential alternative currency that has a lot of similarities to very strong money. So
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank
Okay.
you so
Um,
much.
you want to let everyone know like where they can find you, your handles, your website, all that jazz.
sure, yeah. Instagram's Perennial Pastures Ranch, and then our Twitter is Regen Ranching at Regen Ranching. Please sign up for our newsletter on our website or on our campsite link on Instagram. It's a really good way to follow us. We're starting to do a lot more email marketing. And then, yeah, Courtney, I'd love to do a giveaway with your community, and Devin,
Yeah.
and, just see if we can't get like whatever sort of products you think in our set, whether it's the ancestral blend or whatever that would be most enticing for your community. But we'd love to do some sort of giveaway to just kind of promote carnivore and animal based eating. So yeah, and then we're in a bunch of farmers markets in San Diego. So if you're listening to this and you're in Southern California, we are in 6 farmers markets in San Diego County. So you can find all that information on our website too.
Awesome. Yes, I love that. Come up to Orange County and do some markets. I'd love to see you guys up here.
Yeah, well, maybe you can let us know which are some good ones because we're definitely looking to expand in 2023. We're in 6 now. I have a goal of being in 20 in Southern California by the end of 2023. So, yeah, maybe when we start recruiting for some Orange County markets, we could send a little note out via your networks and try to recruit some awesome, like the best folks that we have are like animal based carnivore. They're just believers, and then when they start learning more about regen, they're like their minds are blown on the potential that we have to just like be super super healthy. So
Yeah. Awesome. Love it. Okay. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us. I can't wait for everyone to
yeah,
hear this. And we appreciate your time.
thank you.